Welcome in, everyone. Listen, if you love a true crime mystery that completely and utterly defies logic, you are in exactly the right place today. Our explainer is going to focus on a case file that honestly reads way less like standard police work and a whole lot more like a wild psychological thriller. We're going to try to untangle the incredibly bizarre web of a wealthy police informer and the forensic officer whose life was basically destroyed by him. Just keeping the facts straight here is a challenge all on its own, trust me. We're talking massive wealth, strange cinematic twists, unproven pseudoscience, and an ending that will literally make you question the reliability of everything we just went over. It absolutely exposes the terrifying fragility of justice and the real danger of relying on bad science in law enforcement. Okay, let's dive into this puzzle. Picture this. How does a forensic officer, right, a guy whose entire career is dedicated to the meticulous scientific gathering of cold, hard evidence, somehow end up rotting in a jail cell for the murder of a police informer? And, even crazier, how does he then supposedly bump into that exact same murdered victim years later? I know, it makes no sense. It's a paradox that completely defies common sense. So to figure out how we actually get to this impossible scenario, we need to walk through the exact details of the source material, step by step. All right, Section 1, the wealthy informer's demise. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast between our two central figures before their fates ever collided. On the left, we've got Nishant Salunke. He's loaded, deeply entrenched in the drug business, and he's operating in the shadows as a police informer, basically living a super chaotic, high-stakes life. Then, on the right, you have Vinanda Das. He's a forensic officer. He literally represents law, order, methodology, and hard science. They couldn't be more different, right? Complete opposite ends of the spectrum. One guy creates the crime scenes and the other analyzes them. But as you'll see, the line separating them is going to blur in the absolute strangest way possible. So let's take a closer look at Nishant's background, based on the actual case records. Now, Nishant was definitely not some low-level operator. The guy had a massive amount of cash just sitting in his bank account, and he owned this huge house in Mumbai. But, his wealth wasn't exactly legit. He made his money doing some pretty bad things, specifically running drugs and committing fraud. And well, when you live that kind of lifestyle, you're going to make some very dangerous enemies. According to the source, that lifestyle eventually caught up with him. He was reportedly kidnapped by a rival drug dealer, and ultimately he died. And really, that should have been the end of Nishant Salunke's story, right? Just a violent end to a violent life. Which brings us to Section 2, a cold case reopened. 10. That is the number of years that passed. A full decade. I mean, think about that. For 10 long years, Nishant is presumed dead and gone, and the world just moves on. In any criminal investigation, that is a massive gap. Evidence degrades, witnesses forget things, the files literally get boxed up and collect dust. But then, a whole decade later, the authorities suddenly decide to blow the dust off this file and reopen the case. And when they do, the crosshairs don't land on a rival cartel or a known mobster like you'd normally expect. Instead, the investigation takes this completely inexplicable left turn, straight toward our forensic officer, Vinanda Das. And guys, the accusations against Vinanda, they get so chaotic and honestly kind of meta. So Vinanda is officially blamed for Nishant's death, but the way the authorities try to pin this on him is what's truly mind-boggling. The case notes literally state that these quote-unquote scripts being played out were actually stories pulled from a book that belonged to the victim Nishant. And the authorities somehow tried to project all these written stories directly onto Vinanda. Oh, and it gets weirder. The file notes this incredibly strange detail. Vinanda apparently knew several actors and actresses who were actively making a film about Nishant Salunke. It's like the boundaries between reality, a fiction book, and a movie production just completely collapsed onto this one forensic officer. All right, Section 3, mind control and downfall. Okay, I need you to hear this clearly. The official record actually cites the use of mind control technology. Yes, you heard me right. The source text explicitly defines this as, and I quote, technology used to measure the truth of human behavior. Now, we're just impartially reporting what's in the case file here, but it goes without saying that bringing something literally labeled mind control technology into a murder investigation is a massive, massive departure from any kind of standard forensic science. Yet, believe it or not, this is exactly the tool the authorities decided to use to evaluate Vinanda's guilt. And what exactly did this so-called technology uncover? Well, the file states, they found that Vinanda was inspired by Nishant Salunke and later accused of his death. So the crucial point here is that this highly unorthodox tech assessment didn't even put Vinanda at a physical crime scene. It basically tried to map out a psychological motive. It concluded that the forensic officer was somehow so deeply inspired by this dead drug dealer that it ultimately led to a murder accusation. And it's this specific, absolutely wild conclusion that triggers the total destruction of Vinanda's life. From here, Vinanda's downward spiral is just a portrait of total collapse. First, he's stripped of his esteemed post as a forensic officer. Poof. Everything he worked for, gone. Second, the source explicitly notes that he suffered intensely. I mean, the sheer weight of these bizarre accusations just completely breaks him. And then comes step 3, which is arguably the most tragic and profound irony of this entire explainer. Vinanda becomes a drug addict who starts selling drugs. Let that sink in. The forensic officer who was accused of killing a drug-dealing police informer has now literally morphed into the exact same thing he was accused of destroying. It's like his own identity was just entirely overwritten by the ghost of Nishant. Moving on to Section 4, the escape to Goa. Desperate for a way out, Vinanda flees to the coastal state of Goa, seeking refuge. But you can't just outrun a shadow like this. He gets caught by the police, he's arrested, and he's thrown into jail. But the most crucial part of this whole timeline, and this brilliantly illustrates the chaos of the justice system here, is the final step. Despite the 10-year investigation, despite the weird book scripts, and despite that totally unproven mind control technology, when it actually came down to the rule of law, the court couldn't prove him guilty. The so-called evidence simply evaporated under actual judicial scrutiny. 3. That is the number of years Vinanda spent sitting in a jail cell waiting for that acquittal. 3 years. Imagine 3 years of your life locked away, carrying the heavy label of a murderer, all based on an investigation that ultimately fell completely apart in front of a judge. By the time he finally walked out of those prison doors, sure, he was technically a free man, but he was a completely broken one. Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, the shocking church resurrection. So, following his release, Vinanda actually stays in Goa. Think about it. He's lost his career, his good reputation, and 3 whole years of his freedom. He's desperately searching for a fresh start, right? Some way to just cleanse all this intense suffering from his life. So, Vinanda decides to be baptized in a local church in Goa. It's this really profound, deeply personal moment of seeking redemption. He's just trying to finally close this dark, chaotic chapter of his life that was so thoroughly ruined by the memory of Nishant Salunke. But the deeply flawed nature of this entire narrative had one last massive twist in store. Let's move to the next part and see how this builds, because while he's at this church in Goa seeking spiritual peace after surviving a literal murder accusation, Vinanda locks eyes with someone whose very existence fundamentally shatters the reality of everything we've just discussed today. Who on earth did Vinanda meet? Nishant Salunke, the guy with the big house in Mumbai, the drug dealer, the police informer who was allegedly kidnapped and declared dead over 13 years ago, the exact same man whose supposed murder ruined Vinanda's life, destroyed his career, and threw him in a jail cell for 3 years. He is alive, literally standing right there in the church in Goa. No way, right? It leaves us with so many massive questions to ponder. If Nishant was alive this entire time, whose body did they actually find? What in the world was that mind control technology actually measuring? Was this whole thing a massive orchestrated conspiracy, a terrible string of incompetent blunders, or something even stranger? It is a stark, terrifying reminder of how fragile reality can be when justice relies on fiction instead of actual facts. It's up to you to decide what the truth really is here. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll catch you next time.